Okay, welcome to another episode of Thoughts and Bolts. I'm your host, Pedro Laveria. Today, I want to comment on a segment of the Danny Jones show, which I think is really important in understanding how and why the UFO subject is so difficult. Because it's difficult for almost everybody in different ways. And I'll explain why it's difficult for different people in different ways. And that's what this episode is about. But the interview is between UAP Gerb and Danny Jones. Danny Jones, very good interviewer, super charismatic guy. UAP Gerb has probably the best UFO channel on YouTube when it comes to the whole issue of reverse engineering and crash retrieval of UFOs. So if you haven't watched UAP Gerb, please do so because he goes into such detail on the whole crash retrieval issue and the whole issue of possible reverse engineering. And if you watch this Danny Jones show, the whole thing, you'll see that this guy has an encyclopedic memory. Really cool. I love UAP Gerb. I like Danny Jones. And let's get into it. Let's get into it, and you'll see what I mean as we go through.
Right.
DOE laboratories, contractors, all that. I like to look at stuff you can really kind of itemize and list out and draw chains of custody. And
Bringing up Bigelow Aerospace is the fact that is John Bigelow? No, it's not John Bigelow. What's his first
Robert
name?
Bigelow.
Robert Bigelow. Robert Bigelow is so obsessed with the remote viewing, precognitive dream, near-death experience stuff.
Parapsychology. Yeah. Bob Bigelow is obsessed with parapsychology, which is the scientific study of psychic abilities, be that telekinesis, clairvoyance, telepathy, even the survival hypothesis, claims of reincarnation, that sort of thing. Parapsychology is a real science, and people who do it use very strict scientific protocols. And when it comes to psychic functioning, just like any scientist, they're always trying to see if the effect predicted is above chance, right? So, for example, if I was in one room and someone else was in another room and they had a deck of, trump cards, right? The pen you used to play poker, and they were having me guess from the other side, from a completely different room, which card was in their hand at a given time, just by dumb luck, just by pure chance, right? There's 52 cards. So just by pure chance, I'm going to guess one, two, or three correctly, right? That's about 5%, less than 5%, one, two, or three cards. But if I'm able to randomly guess correctly 10 cards, okay, now that's interesting, right? That's when you do another experiment with me with, my eyes taped or thrown in a closet, make sure I don't have a walkie-talkie or anything in my teeth, right? Whatever it may be. And I'm not claiming I can do this. I'm just using this as a for instance. But yes, Bob Bigelow is obsessed with parapsychology. And if anyone wants to know about parapsychology, just go on ResearchGate and read papers, peer-reviewed papers on these parapsychological studies. It's really fascinating.
He does these contests with people like to do studies on near-death experiences, and like he's just spending a ton of money trying to understand this crazy stuff. That's like like almost stuff that's impossible to like measure, and it's like,
well, what's causing it is impossible to measure because nobody really knows what's causing it. And again, we're talking about consciousness. We're talking about subjective experience, somebody's subjective experience that they're not supposed to be having, right? If I guess correctly 10 random cards from a deck of 52, hypothetically speaking, um, that's a subjective experience I'm having that I'm communicating to you, and I'm not supposed to be having it, right? And so the actual effect, what can be measured is my calling of the cards, so to speak. But what can't be measured is how I did that, because nobody really knows. All we know is that there is a very real parapsychological effect. Okay. In Soviet Union, they called it psychotronics. Okay, so ESP is real, but nobody knows why it's real. But again, I think everyone just needs to do their own research and actually read the research that's been done and do their own experiments. Try it out for yourself. I mean, there are books on remote viewing. Try it.
Like sci-fi woo woo stuff that he's interested in. And he's like one of the biggest investors in this UFO aerospace stuff.
Yeah, and then according to some of the BASS documents that released from the OSAP program, like BASS was seriously studying the Tic Tac seen by David Fravor as like a human-made creation and so forth. You see some of those. This all started with like a pretty recent Reddit whistleblower, a guy who came forward on Reddit talking about how the Tic Tac is ours, that Lou Elizondo and Jay Stratton specifically are legacy program gatekeepers that essentially kind of keep emergent technologies from surfacing, and then provided a bunch of the BASS documents. Really, really interesting if you saw that.
I haven't seen that. That's interesting.
Which, of course, on Reddit, you got to be a little careful with any whistleblower. Same thing with Reddit and 4chan.
Healthy people on Reddit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would even go even further and say that if you see anything on Reddit or 4chan, you have to start with the assumption that it's garbage, right? Um, they're anonymous sources, right? You don't know where the information's coming from. My favorite Reddit whistleblower was the one that kind of blew up on Twitter a couple of years ago, where somebody claimed to have worked at Fort Detrick, the Tell Lab, with alien cadavers, right? And I mean, it's such a good read because it's so detailed and so is really good. I mean, so whoever wrote that thing either has a PhD in organic chemistry or they're a grad student in organic chemistry, and either they're telling the truth, what they're saying actually happened, or they're just trolling UFO people, right? They're just making fun of us by writing that elaborate hoax, or it could be government disinformation, right? Technically, the CIA isn't supposed to disinform American citizens, but if they write something like that, produce some kind of disinformation on Reddit with the intention of disinforming the Russians or the Chinese, then maybe it's legally defensible, right? So the best thing you can do any of those Reddit leaks or 4chan leaks is just wait and see if what they say turns out to be true in the future vis-a-vis future whistleblowers or any additional discoveries. Because even then it could still be disinformation. It could be the government taking some truth about the UFO phenomenon or alien bodies or whatever, and putting it in this document, but also sprinkling a lot of lies such that when those lies get debunked eventually, then people will also reject the truth they were attached to. Okay, that's how disinformation works. So, yeah, it's not just be careful with Reddit, just start with the assumption that it's BS. And if you're proven wrong, great. But if you're not, well, then you're pretty safe. Let's continue.
Reddit, I don't know why you'd ever post there, but it's still.
I love Reddit.
Me too. I'm always browsing, but it's still pretty interesting. But you never know how to assess that, especially kind of, you're right. Bigelow is really interesting how he's so into more of the metaphysical
and
side.
Paranormal.
Metaphysics. That's the issue of issues. That's the issue of issues. And I'm going to get into it just as soon as I'm done with this.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Like he's
Skinwalker Ranch and werewolves and stuff.
Yeah, we've gone over that on this show. I don't believe there are any werewolves. And I don't think anyone who's studied Skinwalker Ranch, as part of the OSAP program, believes there are werewolves either. The fact that people were seeing impossible animals, anatomically impossible animals on the ranch, tells you something more about perception than what was actually perceived.
Man, it's so crazy.
See, that stuff's tough for me because I like to just stick to military agencies,
Yeah.
intelligence agencies,
Right.
DOE laboratories, contractors, all that. I like to look at stuff you can really kind of itemize and list out and
Yes.
draw out chains of custody and so forth. So some of that esoteric stuff, I'll leave that in the consciousness studies to Jesse, because he's got a way better way to talk about that and way better hold on it than me.
Yeah, wise move because Gerb is the master at all the stuff that he does. I mean, he has a great channel and watch it. And they say fools tread where wise men fear to, right? And I guess I'm a fool. I mean, I'm more into the consciousness stuff. You know what I mean? And that's I think the heart of what I want to talk about today. That the UFO issue is difficult for everybody, but for different reasons. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about myself now. I was into sci before I was into UFOs. And I was into sci when I thought UFOs were BS, even though I had seen a UFO when I was 8 or 9 years old in Alhambra, California. Okay, I had seen something that I still can't explain, and it was something that I haven't found in any UFO book or any other book since. Okay, it looked like a shotgun slug, just standing in the air without moving, and it had these rectangular windows, not organized like in columns or anything, just kind of like in this random pattern, right? And I had seen it while I was playing outside. I was playing outside, and then I just stopped and went. I just looked up for no reason. Like when you're on the subway and you just turn in a certain direction for no reason and someone just happens to be staring at you. Same thing happened. I'm playing and I just look up in the random direction that I look up, there it was. And I went just like that. And I ran inside the house and I said, I've seen a UFO. And obviously no one reacted. They just kept watching TV. And that was that. And I grow up, I get educated and all that stuff, and you're taught to think in a certain way. Society gaslights you into thinking UFOs are BS. And I mean, to this day, I don't know what I saw, right? Because I wasn't able to open it and look inside. But that was an experience that I just had put on the shelf, for my whole life because I didn't have anywhere else to put it, right? But I got into parapsychology because I read this book by Annie Jacobson, was an amazing author. She wrote about the UFO, not the UFO, the CIA psychic spy program. And, in 2016, Obama released so much of it. Most of what's on CIA FOIA regarding remote viewing was released during the Obama administration, right? And I didn't just believe Annie Jacobson. Oh my gosh, it's in a book. She worked for the New York Times. Wow. I didn't just believe it because it was in a book. I used that book as a map for my own CIA FOIA deep dive. And I studied these materials, right? And I did my own experiments. And, I came away knowing that, hey, psychic powers are real. And not only is ESP real, it's as natural as sweating, right? Everybody can do it to some extent, just like anyone can shoot a basketball. Almost no one can shoot a basketball as good as LeBron James, but almost everyone can just shoot basketball, right? And I think ESP is the same way. But then you had the 2017 New York Times, story about ATIP. And I remember I had only been living in Japan for only a year, and I was, visiting my family in Florida. And I remember they were showing the gimbal video on CNN talking about UFOs, and I told my brother-in-law, "Oh, this was bullshit," and he just kind of shrugged his shoulders. But even then, late 2017 and 2 years later in 2020, I didn't believe these were aliens or anything like that. And finally, I listened to David Fravor on Rogan talking about the Nimitz incident. And even then, I didn't really believe. But once Trump released the big three videos, the Go Fast, the Gimbal, the FLIR, through Navy FOIA, and then now I had a chain of custody that didn't involve a rock star, right? I had a chain of custody, and then, I started looking at documentaries, and then I started doing my own research, right? And then I found the Lacken Heath UFO case, right? Where in 1952, right, or thereabouts, there was a dogfight over the skies of England, very similar to the one that occurred with the, fighter jets from the USS Nimitz in San Diego. Okay. And, up until this point, I thought, well, maybe it's top secret American tech. That's what everyone thinks initially, um, who goes into the subject slowly. But once I saw that this was happening, in the early 50s, okay, and that there were these objects that were moving in impossible ways, and that these fighter jets were, dealing with them in the early 50s, just like they were dealing with them in the early 2000s, then I knew, okay, the Lockheed Martin theory doesn't explain everything. And once you have a tic tac, oh wow, the tic tac, and you dig deeper and you see cases like Solaris, Brazil in 1977, Ball Sol in 65, or the Lonnie Zamora case in New Mexico in 64, I believe it is, 64 or 66. And you also have this case in 1952 over the skies of Germany. Um, you think, you know what? Top secret, Lockheed Martin technology, the Chinese, okay, that doesn't explain this phenomenon in toto, right? And I also think it's fascinating that this egg here from 1952 in Over the Skies of Germany is very similar to what was at Colares in 1977 in Brazil. But once I did my own research and then I started realizing, like, look, there are UFOs, there are unidentified flying objects, and our culture had been gaslit for 80 years regarding that phenomenon. And so that many people, including people like me, um, we put these experiences we had on the shelf. And we had been done a disservice, which is why I'm so passionate about this subject. Metaphysics, metaphysics. That's what this is about. Because look, I was one who was super into psi, super into ESP, and had to be brought down kicking and screaming regarding UFOs, right? UAP Gerb is a master of, crash retrieval research, right? But I didn't believe in crash retrievals until the Schumer-Rounds Amendment was defeated in the House. Okay, that was late 2003, early 2004. Okay, up until then, I was really iffy about things like Roswell, right? I was really iffy about crash retrievals. Okay, but once I saw that, this idea of alien bodies and crash retrievals, if it's BS, why not pass the Schumer Rounds Amendment? Why not, Mike Turner, add an amendment to the amendment, a proviso, that not only will we have eminent domain and start to disclose more information, but the alien bodies, we're going to put them in cryogenic chambers so that Tom DeLonge can take them on tour and so he could put them on stage while he sings his music, right? Oh, and in the UFOs, oh man, we're gonna have Anderson Cooper and from some Lockheed Martin, storage facility with a Tic Tac flying in the background, and he's gonna walk inside, and oh my gosh, it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, right? And not only that, the Roswell crash, we're gonna put that at Disneyland, right there in Tomorrowland, right? So everyone can see it for themselves. If UFO crash retrievals were BS, if the whole thing about alien bodies was BS, that's exactly what you would do. And that's exactly what they should do so that we could put it to rest. But because they didn't, because they acted like a cheating husband who will not give up his cell phone to his wife, right? The wife wants to see the DMs. We are the wife, right? And the husband insists he's not cheating on the wife, but he won't give up the damn cell phone. He won't, you know, show her the Snapchats or whatever they use these days. I was like, okay. It has to be true, right? I had finally given in. All right, Grush, I believe you now. Wilson Davis, the whole Wilson Davis thing, which had leaked on Imgur, right, initially. I was iffy about that up until that point. I was like, well, it's got to be true, right? It's like, yeah. So someone like me who readily accept, like, I won't say readily accepts, but definitely knows science is real, okay, had to be brought kicking and screaming to the crash retrieval narrative, right? Just as easily, somebody else can accept the crash retrieval narrative very easily. I won't say easily. They can accept the crash retrieval narrative. They can accept the, alien bodies. They can accept the physical reality of UFOs, but they have to be brought kicking and screaming when it comes to ESP, psi, the paranormal. And at the heart of this is metaphysics. Metaphysics is what it's all about. Okay. Now, if you live in the English speaking world, the de facto metaphysics of your culture is physicalism. It is in the air. Okay. So much so that people don't even recognize it. Okay. So, physicalism, for those who don't know, is the idea that the only real things that exist are those things which can be exhaustively described using mathematics. So we're talking about boiling point, charge, spin, all that good stuff, mass. That's what matter is. You can describe it exhaustively with mathematics. It doesn't need any qualities to be understood. You can just use the numbers. And the only things that exist are space, time, matter, and energy. And so everything that doesn't fall within that rubric, by definition, doesn't exist. Is an illusion. Is a hallucination, which is ironic because what's hallucinating if mind doesn't exist? If mind is simply an epiphenomenon of matter, what's actually doing the hallucination? Um, but that's not the worst part of physicalism, right? If the physicalism metaphysics is true, then ESP and psi, well, it can't be true, right? Because some of these experiments with telepathy, for example, are being done using Faraday cages, right, where no electrical signal can come in and out. And so if you can't explain it in terms of you know uh, radio waves, electro magnetic anything, then it can't be real, right? For the physicalist, the only thing that exists are these quantum fields, which are, exciting in the going through different levels of excitation in certain ways that, produce these particles and they interact with each other to create the world we live in. But the qualitative experience of that world is an illusion. Okay. Somehow the mind that perceives this is less real than the thing it is perceiving. The thing we are most certain about that I think, therefore I am, is the thing which is can be least trusted as being real. That which is epistemically prior to space, time, matter, and energy, mainly consciousness, qualitative experience, is somehow ontologically uh, posterior to that which it is experiencing. Um, and that, if the only things that exist are space, time, matter, and energy, then mind is this thing that just comes out of nowhere like magic, right? Um, and that's why you can't explain the correlations between brain states and subjective experience, because subjective experience couldn't exist if physicalism is real. There's no explanation for it. And I mean, Bernardo Kastrup has done better arguments against physicalism, but I'm an idealist. I think mind is ontologically prior to matter. Matter is an epiphenomenon of mind, not the other way around. And of course, there's neutral monism, right? Which is to say that there's some third unknown substance which is generating mind and matter, or that mind and matter are two sides of some unknown same coin, right? So mind and matter are just two sides of some coin that it's itself neither truly material or mental. But I like idealism the best because that which is epistemically prior to matter, right, is also that which is ontologically prior to matter. And that is way simpler and more rational, in my view. Okay. Now, Cartesian dualism, that's another form of metaphysics, which was really just a useful fiction that Descartes invented in order to get the Catholic Church off the neck of scientists in Europe. So basically, what he said was, look, there's mind and there's matter. They're two different substances. You, the church, you guys can deal with mind. We, the scientists, will deal with matter. And we're not contradicting you, and you're not contradicting us because we're dealing with two completely different things. And the church said, okay. And so they had to taunt, right? And so now scientists could do their job without getting burned alive. And as science progressed and they ignored mind, they began to believe that there isn't really doesn't exist, or that it's epiphenomenal, right? Um, or it's some kind of an illusion. Okay. So there you go. That's really the issue, right? Because if idealism is true, if mind is fundamental, then there's definitely space for psychic functioning. Same thing with neutral monism. Like I said, I'm an idealist. I like Arthur Schopenhauer. I think his model of the world as will and representation is excellent, which is to say that this world of space-time, matter, and energy is our mental representation of some ontologically real um, object outside of us. That yes, there is an objective reality outside of me. Okay, but that which is objectively true outside of me that would exist even if I didn't. It's not mine. It's not space. It's not spatial. It's not time. It's not matter. It's not energy. Okay, it's will. And so the world we live in is our own mental representation of something else. It is a representation which corresponds to, is correlated with, and it's and it's a representation essentially of something else. Okay, and it's a very useful representation. And that which it represents is the will, this one unified will to live. Okay, so that's Arthur Schopenhauer. Now, what does this have to do with UFOs? Well, again, if you look at the free study, okay, it was done by Renato Hernandez, who is the first guest on this show, and also Rudy Shield and others. If you look at the free study, which is the largest study of people who have had close encounters, people who are UFO experiencers, contactees, okay. If you look at these people and their experiences, right? Uh, 59% of them said they received a message of love and oneness, right? And these people who had contact with the non-human intelligence, right? Uh, 37% of them claimed that the communication was two-way using telepathy. Okay, so 37% of these contactees in the largest ever study on UFO contactees, 37% of them claimed that there was two-way telepathy. Okay. 34% of them reported it as a non-physical thought slash voice downloaded from a non-human intelligence to a human, right? 60% of them also reported having received telepathic messages on more than 5 occasions. Okay. So that's why Bob Bigelow is obsessed with parapsychology. That's why he's obsessed with the paranormal. That's why he's obsessed with ESP, with psi, because that's where the UFO phenomenon inevitably leads. Okay. And so, yeah, he did OSAP. He learned whatever he could from that. And now he's doing the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, right? And that, because that's where this all leads. And I would argue that ultimately the UFO phenomenon is about parapsychology. It is about psi. That these others, whoever they are, want us to get into that. And so that's why they demonstrate it overwhelmingly in these close encounter events. Okay. So again, I think if you have a materialist ontology, if you believe in physicalism, if that's your default metaphysical worldview, then telepathy and clairvoyance and even telekinesis is gonna be extremely hard to explain because we can't explain it with physics. We just can't. When people do like Dean Radin or Rupert Sheldrake or all these other parapsychologists, all they can do is record an effect. They can measure effects, but there's no physical explanation for why these effects occur. The same thing with remote viewing. Remote viewing is real. I mean, it it's real. Okay, but we can't explain it yet in terms of physics. Okay, and that's a problem if you're a physicalist, right? But if you're an idealist that believes that, look, the substrate of all existence is mental, right? Or that if you're a neutral monist and you say that, look, mind and matter, they both come from this singular source, and maybe that's the conduit through which this information is being passed through, then suddenly, psi isn't an issue. It's something to be explained down the road, but it's within the realm of possibility. And that's why I like to make this funny little image of Schopenhauer with the aliens, right? The world is will and representation. Because if you look closely at the will, there is a fundamental unity between all of them, even though it isn't apparent with the five senses. But yeah, so I think that was a very fascinating segment of the Danny Jones interview with UAP Gerb, because again, it just shows that different people, get upset by this UFO phenomenon in different ways, right? Someone like me, who's more into the woo, the consciousness, the parapsychological, the psychotronic aspect of this, don't have a problem with psi. If anything, it's a mark of authenticity for us. But we do have a problem with crash retrievals, right? We have to be dragged kicking and screaming to accept the physicality of the UFO phenomenon. Whereas someone with a more physicalist ontology, um, they don't necessarily have to be dragged kicking and screaming with regards to the reality of UFOs or even crash retrievals. But they do need to be dragged kicking and screaming with regards to psi, right? And so that's why this whole show is called Thoughts and Bolts, right? I reject the nuts and bolts approach and I reject the consciousness only approach. I think to understand the UFO phenomenon as a whole, you have to take a thoughts and bolts approach. Okay. So that's it for today. Um, Keep watching my show. And remember, like I always say, consciousness is not classified. And if you agree with me that consciousness is not classified, hit like, subscribe, and share this video. Thank you. Good night.